Well, we're glad to be here. Would you guys please let us know who you are?
Hello, I'm Jessica Sauer. I'm Latina Chavez, and I represent UNICEF.
My name is Takumo Adedende, and I represent UNICEF.
My name is Victor Nante, and I'm also part of UNICEF, and I also attend the Chavez.
And our coach today is Ms. Krista Fancy.
All right, well, great to have you guys here. We're happy to be here. So why don't we go ahead and get started? This is Unit 2, Question 3. How did the framers create the Constitution? An American historian writes that ideas put forth by the Anti-Federalists have surfaced again and again among later generations of Americans. Those ideas, he claims, are a vital element in the American political tradition and are properly viewed as part of the philosophy of the Constitution. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Why did the Anti-Federalists object to what they claim were very broad grants of power to the federal government, such as the phrases in the Constitution, necessary and proper, and the general welfare? Nearly all Anti-Federalists agreed that transfer of sovereignty to a national government would mean states would retain but a shadow of their former power. Evaluate their arguments. May begin.
We agree with the scholar Ralph Ketchum. The ideas of the Anti-Federalists are still a vital element of our political tradition.
As scholar Herbert Storing asserts, the Anti-Federalists were committed to both Union and the states, to both great American Republic and the small self-governing community, to both commerce and civic virtue, to both private gain and public good. Anti-Federalist thinking explored the tension between these competing values. They added to our beliefs about limited government, decentralized power, and individual rights.
These ideas have surfaced again and again throughout our history, and each generation had navigated through these tensions differently. Today, we see them at the heart of our modern debates over voter ID laws, healthcare, gay marriage, and gun control.
Storing explains this quite clearly. These tensions were not resolved by the Constitution, but live on in our philosophy today because they are inherent in the principles and traditions of American political life.
The Anti-Federalists' objections to the Constitution were based on healthy skepticism of centralized government, which caused them to fear the broad grants of power listed in the Constitution.
Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to do what is necessary and proper to carry out their responsibilities. Anti-Federalists objected to this broad grant of power because it could potentially allow Congress to grant monopolies in trade and commerce, create new laws, and inflict severe or unusual punishments, and extend their powers indefinitely.
Article 1, Section 8 also authorizes Congress to legalize taxes in order to promote the general welfare. Anti-Federalists worried that this clause would be used to expand the powers of Congress to make any laws and taxes they wanted. Thomas Jefferson offered this view of the clause. They, who is Congress, are not to lay taxes ad libitum for any purpose they please, but only to pay the debts or provide for the welfare of the Union. In like manner, they are not to do anything they please to provide for the general welfare, but to lay taxes for that purpose.
However, Jefferson's ideas of the limits of the general welfare clause were not explicitly stated in the Constitution.
Today, Congress uses these broad grants of power to take an active role in policies about education, healthcare, housing, and poverty, even though their other enumerated powers do not necessarily justify these actions. This has led to a system of government dominated by federal power, not state power.
Under the Articles of Confederation, the states had the complete sovereignty. They controlled taxes, regulated commerce, and maintained their own militias. Each state also had equal representation in federal Congress.
The new Constitution would change all of this. After 1789, the federal government would have the power to control interstate commerce, raise an army, and levy taxes. And actions of the federal government would be supreme law of the land.
Anti-Federalists argue that this left states but just a shadow of their former power. This was a valid argument. The Constitution did mark a significant shift in powers away from the states.
However, states still control many of the most important functions of government. They run schools, issue business licenses, punish criminal acts, and provide for parks and roads. Marijuana laws and marriage policies vary from state to state, and do voting laws and public assistance programs.
So, while they certainly have less power than they did under the Articles of Confederation, states still play a significant role in our constitutional system.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's have a few follow-up questions here for you. Let's talk about the military a little bit. Why were the Anti-Federalists concerned with a standing army? How would you evaluate the Anti-Federalist argument in favor of keeping the military more under control at a local level?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the military. You know, the Anti-Federalists were afraid of the standing army. How would you evaluate their argument in favor of keeping control of the military on a local level?
I believe that they fear that the national government would eventually dominate will control the people, because when the Constitution was first ratified, there was no such thing as a Bill of Rights, and the rights of the people weren't protected. So the fact that the Congress and the fear of these grants of powers, they feared that the army would just dominate and just take over society, common day people.
To follow up with what my colleague said, today, with as far as the War Powers Act, the Congress was supposed to be notified by the president to deploy troops in certain countries, and as seen today, the president has more power over it, or well, the president isn't notifying the Congress about it, such as the use of unmanned drones in the countries as far as Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia.
One thing is that sometimes you don't hear stressed a lot, that the anti-federalists had a belief that members of Congress should be term limited, that you should have term limits. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I do agree with, just like in government today, we have House representatives that they can, I guess, keep getting elected, but I don't think there should be a limit, because overall, there's new ideas coming up, and if the people like the Senate, their congressmen, then the people should keep electing their Senate. It's what the people want, not what government wants.
I actually disagree with my colleagues. I think there should be term limits, because I think it's unfair for someone to have a certain amount of years in the Senate or House of Representatives. And I say this because it's like in human nature, once somebody has a certain amount of time somewhere, they get too comfortable, so they may stop, trying. Does that make sense? They may stop trying to do their job, and then they start kind of slacking off. So I think there should be term limits.
I disagree with what my colleague Jennifer says due to the term limits, because when there are term limits, you're always having new members trying to fill in their ideas, and then it will be harder for the next person who fills in the seat to also put in their views, or also follow up if they agree or disagree.
Thank you. Have the anti-federalist fears of broad grants of power proven to be justified? And what evidence can you offer to support the grants that you're going to get?
Okay. Well, we actually could see that their fear actually does exist today with the General Welfare Clause. We see that the Congress can add an extra tax that allows that forces people to pay extra tax for health care, and we see that, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was not forced; it was a tax that was implemented, and that goes back to the General Welfare Clause, which allows Congress to use taxes when it's necessary, when the general welfare is in danger.
Let's talk a little bit about the Bill of Rights. Evaluate the need for the Bill of Rights to be added to the Constitution, and kind of what are some of the arguments for and against it.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, talking about the Bill of Rights. Let's talk about the need to have the Bill of Rights added to the Constitution and the arguments both for and against adding it.
There's an important need for the Bill of Rights, especially if you want the people's, if you don't want a government that is made into a totalitarian system where the people don't have rights whatsoever. And it's important for the people to have certain rights, and just to have important to have rights.
The main argument that the anti-federalists argued for the Bill of Rights was that the Constitution that was ratified was not protecting. It was the protection, the government protecting the people, but not the protection of the people from the government, and that was the main argument of that. And that led certain states not to ratify it because of the Bill of Rights. It was not implemented until after Virginia and New York ratified the Constitution. That's when the Bill of Rights was added.
The main argument against the Bill of Rights added during the ratification debate was that Federalists felt as though if you list, if you give a list of rights, like specific rights for people, they felt as though people may try to interpret those rights in different ways. So that was one thing.
Following up on the question I asked and gave, we talked about the Healthcare Act. What about fears of broad grants of power to the president? Has any of that proven to be justified? The anti-federalist fear of a tyrannical president?
Well, we see that, now the president, his job is to, execute the laws, but we see now that he's actually creating policies. We see that with the gun control policies that Obama passed. He passed 23 executive actions without Congress approval, and he's acting as, a lawmaker, as he shouldn't be doing that.
Thank you.